Thank you guys for coming out, and thanks to Ted Haptegabber. If you have not been to Ted's live talks, you can follow him online, and he's really invented a kind of badass, free-roaming university out of thin air, and I think is building a community here in Los Angeles that I live in New York, and people think there's no culture in Los Angeles, even though most of what we consume comes from here. Mary-Louise Parker is an actress, and I'm not, she's an extraordinary actress. I mean, we could talk about, you know, Weeds, Emmys, Golden Globes, Angels in America, Hedda Gabler, The Snow Geese more recently. I just want to say I saw her show Heisenberg last year, and she doesn't know this. Well, she does now. But when someone says, I want you to come to my two-woman show where there's no intermission for 90 minutes, and I'm like a 60-year-old woman with a bladder the size of a pea, I'm like, am I going to have to wear a Depends, like, to see your show? And it's my idea of hell, really, to be invited to such an event. And no, this is a true story about this play, and I walked out and I took a breath, and she hit that stage, and it stayed hit for 90 minutes. It was a breathtaking performance. If you get, it's going to Broadway, of course, if you get a chance to see it. And the other thing, I'm not going to bury the lead this year, is that her book, Dear Mr. You, which, by the way, was submitted blind. It's not a celebrity memoir. It's a book that arrived naked without Mary-Louise Parker's name on it at a very prestigious publisher, Scribner. A woman who bought my first books, Nan Graham, bought it, and is now number 5 on the bestseller list. So. Mary-Louise!
I feel bad because there's people over here and I feel like we need to move back. So it's hi. Sorry. Yeah. Not that far, but.
There's people up there. That's okay. Hello up in there, everybody.
Hi. Oh my God.
Hello. Mary-Louise, Dear Mr. You it's a book of letters, and it's a book that really has its origins in gratitude. I'm looking for the line, and it's a kind of a series of love letters or thank you letters, and it's about her encounters with the masculine.
Yeah.
From what? Starting, you have grandfather, son, but you also have
before
a few.
I was born.
Yeah, from people from before you were born, people, dear future man, that addressed to whoever her daughter is going to marry, and believe me, he better brace himself.
Yeah. I will cut him.
You will cut him, because that's how it has to be.
That's how it has to be, yeah.
To you who can fix my screen door, my attitude, and open most jars. To you who codifies, slams a puck, builds a decent cabinet, or a perfect sandwich. You, sir, you took my order, my pulse, my bullshit. I know you don't always want to start reading, but one of my favorite passages was addressed to you. Actually have dated a couple people.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a couple
of
decades that were a little bit crowded, yeah. Yeah.
If I see the laser light hit your forehead, I'll look out there where you've spent a lot of time in this town. But one of the people he was kind of a figure, he was kind of a sex god, wasn't he? Dear Blue, is that a fair way to describe him?
I don't know about, he was a nature man, he was an iconoclast, he was like no one I'd ever met before. And I was working 2 jobs that summer and I didn't have any money, and he came to visit my other job. And I was so horrified because at that job I was pretending to be, you know, a real citizen with like a sundress on and, you know.
A sundress.
I tried to look like a nice, you know, girl who
You were in
lived
drag, in other words.
place that had a working bathroom, which I didn't. And he showed up with his friend, and the way they're dressed I'll talk about later, but they came across the parking lot towards this fancy coffee shop where I worked, and I was so horrified that I hid because I thought they can't come in here. And he was really, should I talk about what he looked like?
Yes, please. You've got to talk about you've got to talk about his wardrobe, because he
Yeah.
did have a loincloth.
Yeah, he did. Dear Blue, did you sew it? I'm just trying to imagine where you got it. There was no such thing as Amazon yet, and I'd never seen one, except on Tarzan. Your loincloth. Did you use fabric from an old couch? You didn't have a couch. Maybe you liberated a square of fabric from your teepee or stitched together some burlap bags that once held hydroponic fertilizer. You wore that cloth on your loins every day, so maybe there was even a spare. You were a fruitarian, eating nothing but fruit and nuts, though apparently beer was also a fruit. A van illegally parked on the beach, not beside it, on it, was your home, and you needed no shirt, no shoes, nothing. You and your friend Gary drove to the border at dawn to get avocados and figs for the co-op where I worked also. And then you went to the beach if you had no one to Rolf. You were a Rolfer, too, massaging those lucky people while wearing nothing or your loincloth. Okay, maybe a piece of jewelry was also on your body. You and Gary both had gorgeous, ocean-soaked hair that was longer than mine. Gary had a mane of chestnut that might have made him rich if he'd opened a 7 Stations of the Cross theme park. But your hair was its own Disneyland. It glowed in the dark from salt water and sun. That hair gave you the vibe of being both switched on and overcooked at the same time. You were the only man I've ever seen who could wear your hair in a bun with a flower and not seem sissy. You had soul patches and tans, period. Diving in the surf might happen 5 times a day, and how could you lie down at the tide and feel sand rushing everywhere if you were wearing clothes? When you took me to that nude beach up the coast, taking off your loincloth seemed brazen. A dog could walk away with your entire wardrobe in its mouth. Ripping it off was a breeze, though, and you threw yourself in the water, leaving me in awe of how little there was between you and the world. It took hardly anything to be not just happy, but filled with a kind of alien joy. Even your name, which you said had become you after you dropped acid and were sitting on a massive rock by the cliffs. When you opened your eyes, everything, including you, was blue. Everything except your loincloth, which for the summer I knew you, was a light brown man wrap that made you and Gary look like Malibu Jesus dolls and kept you from being arrested for indecent exposure by more or less covering your genitalia. You and Gary would come into the co-op first thing in the morning with Minnie Ripperton pouring out of your van. The two of you would pelt me with flowers while I sat in the back of the stockroom, bagging and weighing organic nuts, rennet-free cheese, and bizarre dried sea vegetables. Some days joining me at the scale was a sweet and sullen transgender boy named Lux who wasn't much better than I was. We got in trouble for throwing a block of Gouda up at the ceiling fan to see if it would come down in chunks. So they separated us. They had one of us bag while the other stocked dairy, which meant standing in the refrigerator and replenishing all the yogurt while freezing our asses off. I found the scale confusing and was never good at math, so I'd spend hours getting yelled at by that girl named Jackie, who was a higher up. I heard you used to date her, which I had a hard time picturing. Jackie dressed in those macrame tops that she made and tie-dyed, and she sewed her own maxi pads with inspiring words inked on in beet juice to make her connect to her yoni. I don't know if you were into this also, but Jackie drank her pee, which once she blew in my face lightly and then asked me, "Hey, does my breath smell like urine?" It was brave in a way, but she was hard to admire because she admonished me daily for being inept. She said my mistakes made her feel confused and out of touch. Freshly punished, I'd go back to my station, try to get the plankton or ground matcha out from under my fingernails, wishing I didn't have to work 2 jobs or that one of them didn't have to be this one, which sometimes paid me in avocados. She clearly still had a thing for you because she hated me not only for my mistakes, but also for your chilling out with me while I unwittingly butchered all the price tags. You came over one day and when she'd been particularly harsh, it said, "Hey, come on, she can't fire you. If you were fired, all the men who work here would protest."
Wow. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I hear celebrity memoir, I think she's going to show us her titties. It's just a hope.
No, I did that during my
I see.
work. So
I
you,
think-
you can just Google that if you
It's
want.
unbelievable, unbelievable writing to me. You know, I think, you know what I think we have in common? I think we're both a little bit daddy's girls.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of your father in this.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of my father in me, and you know, I think I'm a lot of extremes, and he was a lot of extremes, and I always feel like, yeah, there's not a lot of gray area with me, and there wasn't with him either.
He actually, he sort of took you cruising for boys in Europe. I mean, inadvertently a little
Well, he didn't
bit.
realize that. Yeah,
He did?
unwittingly. Yeah, because he, my girlfriend and I had saved all year to. We wanted to go to Europe to get Eurail passes, and we were hoping to meet boys because no boys paid attention to us in
Hard to
in our
believe.
town.
They're kicking themselves.
And he was so, her parents, we came up with the money from working jobs, and her parents wouldn't let her go. And I was so devastated. I cried for so many days, and my father couldn't bear that, to see me that unhappy, and couldn't afford it either, but somehow managed to take us to Europe on a family trip, which wasn't my dream, but it was just, that's emblematic of who he was. You know, if something bothered you, he would not be able to stop thinking about it until he'd found a way to fix it, or, you know, he'd come up with something, some kind of solution. He couldn't bear to see people he loved unhappy. He literally could not bear it. Like, it consumed him.
You know, you talked a little bit about your parents' marriage last night, about your mother. Because I've got to say, I just met her tonight, and she's hot.
She's stunning, yeah.
She's a little hottie
beautiful.
patati. No, she's
Yeah.
she's beautiful.
She's beautiful.
She's kind of beautiful,
But she's beautiful, I think, because she, you know, there are many, many layers to her, and they all lead back to one very pristine, very beautiful soul. And she occupies a space spiritually and psychically on this planet that I think is underpopulated. Let's say she's very rare. She's a true lady. She's truly elegant, and she's.
That's right. That's how I felt about
Yeah,
her.
and it's real. It's 100% real, and she's oddly so like my daughter, who's adopted. They share so many traits and
It's a
little
kind of poise.
eccentricities, and they're both very artistic, and yeah, she's really rare, my mother, and you can't really miss her because she's incredibly beautiful. She's incandescent.
And your dad was really nuts about her, right?
Yes, yeah, which was unfortunate for me because I thought that's kind of how it was all the time. And I do know a few men like that, but I thought, oh, then they're super honorable and loyal, and then that's
But then you,
doesn't really happen like that. But he was devoted to my mother, devoted, and rightfully so, and appreciated what a lady she was, and appreciated the care she took with the way that she dressed, and never was one to spend on herself, but managed. You know, I still have some of her clothes because she took such good care of them. You know.
I love that.
Yeah.
And then, but then when you start dating, you meet a guy you call in the book Cerberus, who's the three-headed dog that guards the gates of
He had
hell.
several heads, yeah. It could be 3, 4, 5. It's hard to say, but yeah. I mean, in the end,
You dated him. You
yeah,
did.
I certainly did, didn't I? But I think the point of that story was, in some ways, I wanted to write a book that was about gratitude because I have a son, and I feel like when I write a book and you read it, I'm putting my thoughts in your head, and there's a responsibility that comes with that to me. And I think that I didn't want to write any kind of indictment or anything finger wagging or ugly, and I wanted, you know, they're little acts of heroism to me. There a couple of them happen to be here tonight, maybe a few, and men that gave me something massive in a moment that I needed it, and they maybe didn't even know how much that gift carried, or the weight that it came with, how much it resonated with me, and I wanted to celebrate that, and because it was particularly male. And sometimes, you know, there's been like some feminist questions, like, what about women? Yes, I love women, obviously. Like, I'm not this, but there are two genders, and there's nothing wrong with celebrating men, you know, and the masculine. And as I said, I have a son, and there is a particular kind of comfort that you get from a man or a man's voice, as there is from a woman that's just as potent in a different way. But this was the one I was writing about this time. And I think there's been enough, you know, man-hating stuff written already. I don't need to write that. You know, there doesn't need to be anything ugly.
Yeah, I said in a class recently, you know, you guys know that book, Men Bad, Women Good, and they all start to write it down. I'm like, that was a joke. But the thing I loved about the Cerberus, yeah, they didn't know. They were like, oh, we'll get that. The thing I loved about the Cerberus chapter that, I mean, I sound like I misled people, is you probably indicted yourself.
Yeah.
As much or more as you did the.
Well, I was complicit, right? Like, I laid down on the tracks, and there was something I needed in order to keep provoking or conjuring or seeking that kind of negative attention and mistreatment, and it was a lesson I had to learn, and that I am grateful for mostly because I can have a conversation with my daughter now that's a different kind of conversation that I could have had 20 years ago. You know, before I would have just been saying the things that I knew were right, but I hadn't lived. You know, and I think, and also I say sweet beast at the beginning of the book, and that's for a reason, because there were sweet things in those relationships. And it wouldn't be a book that was true if I didn't represent those relationships, but at the same time, I wanted it to be presented in a way that was almost a cartoon, you know, that this Leviathan and this perfect little angel, and in a way that allowed me to add levity. And I giggled constantly while writing that. I mean, it was ugly, and some of it's very ugly, but some of it I thought was really funny.
Well, also, I mean, you say in someone else's narrative.
I could be
the monster in somebody else's narrative.
But I feel like I don't
but
know
who
how you would
cares about
trust
them?
me. But I don't know how you would trust me as a narrator if I didn't present myself honestly, and I don't. I maybe put more into that than I should, but I feel like I have to present myself in all dimensions and honestly and unblemished sometimes. Or how can you believe me when I tell you a beautiful moment? How can you believe me if I tell you a moment when I felt, you know, I rose above things, and, you know, and I think they're interesting. I think that people want to hear that and can learn from that. And I don't mind sharing that. I'm deeply flawed, and I'm the first person to admit it, you know.
How hard was this to write?
Pardon?
How hard was this for you to write?
It was wonderful to write, and I loved writing it.
Really?
I loved the sitting down when it was coming out, because I love to write, and I have always loved to write. It was hard because I didn't have enough time to maybe pay tribute to everyone I would like to, and because I was really sick in the middle of it.
Quite dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I guess I misunderstood. I always thought maybe that was me I was thinking of and projecting onto you. But I always thought this was much harder for you to write, but I guess I'm just remembering maybe you were ill and got sick in the middle of it.
No, I loved the actual writing of it. I sat down sometimes and wouldn't stand up until 4 hours later. When I have something to write and I feel inspired to, the only thing that feels as good as, being with my children or being on stage, really. It feels, I love that feeling of writing.
But you could have actually been a writer. I mean, that's what's odd to me. I mean, I really can't I'm one of those people that when they gave me grants, people were like, well, she just can't do anything else. We're going to have to give her some money. I mean, I always wondered why you could have been a writer. What possessed you to be an actress instead?
That's actually a good question, because my mother often, if she came to an event with me or something and someone asked her, did you know she would be an actress? She always said, no, I thought she would be a writer. And she said recently, I'm vindicated now. So I don't know. I think acting was a way for me. I still feel so bad about this whole side of the room. But no, they see you, so it's fine. I feel like it was the way. I was so awkward and I was so uncomfortable around people as a child, and I stuttered, and I was really admired my older sister, so beautiful, like my mother, and so magnetic and charismatic, and wanted to be like her, and always had, to me, through my eyes as a child, had a way of communicating with people, and still does, that is magical. And I didn't have that. I was often misunderstood, I felt like. And when I was acting, I don't feel misunderstood. I feel like people understand what I'm trying to say. I don't even stop to think, do you understand me? I don't even stop to question, am I being understood? And I don't care. But in life, I always think, did I say enough? Was I thankful enough? Was I nice enough? Did I say the wrong thing? And I don't think that when I'm acting at all.
And yet, one of your first classes, which you write about in Dear Movement Teacher, you weren't exactly the star.
I was not a star pupil.
You were not the star of the acting class, the movement class.
No, and my friend Steve, who's here tonight, was in acting class with me, and
Steve was in that class?
Yes, he was, and he used to quote that arts probation letter that said...
How can you even be put on arts probation?
Yeah. They were going to cut me from the school. He loved the part, I don't know where he's sitting, but he loved the part where it said, lack of physical energy is alarming.
Is alarming.
And I hope, and there was also a part, her use of her sexuality is offensive. Offensive. Do you remember that lack of physical energy? He's nodding, yes. And what else did he say? She's disruptive in class, asks questions that are, he didn't like me at all. He didn't like me at all. Steve did, not the teacher didn't. Like me
and yet you somehow managed to...
Well, it was an amazing opportunity for me, because it was the moment when I discovered, because there was another student, Michael Kaplan, who I'm so grateful to, who, I just said his own name, I've not revealed anyone's last name, but whatever. Anyway, he was really brutally honest with me in a moment when I needed to hear something, and I was bitter about the
review. You almost said review.
I almost said review. I was bitter about the, what do you call it? Evaluation.
Probation letter.
Yeah, and I was like, he doesn't even care about me. That's not even an evaluation. He doesn't understand me. And he was like, yes, he does. He said, that's the letter he wrote. He was your teacher, and what are you going to do about it? And it was such a gift to have someone be that brutally honest, because it happened at a moment when I was able to hear it, and because I was so ashamed, there was no arguing with it. He was absolutely right. It was irrefutable. This man is the teacher. It doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't matter how you feel about your points. he's the teacher. If you want to change his opinion, you can, if you choose to. And I loved that challenge, and I loved that idea, and suddenly it was just one of those moments when I was able to hear the truth about myself. And I'm so grateful to him and to the teacher who allowed me to, he let me in, and he let me change his mind about me. And that was massively fortifying. And
you found you had agency.
yeah, exactly.
Was
yeah,
that-
and I think that's my dad, because my dad could hear a truth about himself. He might be mad immediately, but then he would apologize, and he could hear it. And he knew how to be accountable, and he valued accountability so much. And I think that's one thing that it's very hard for me to take in other people.
So he had that
when they're not
wonderful way
accountable.
of dealing with reprimands at our officer
Yeah.
candidate school.
Yeah, he was at officer candidate school, and he said he was watching everyone get up and sort of, suffer their indictment for whatever they'd done. And he said there was a certain sameness in the room, because everyone would say, yes, officer, I did this, I apologize, and this is why, and saying the reason why. And then his turn came, and he got up, and he said, they said, so, Private, you've done thus and so. And he said, yes, sir. And they said, do you have anything to add? And he said, no, sir. And everyone went completely silent. And he said, Private, and he said, I am completely responsible, and it will never happen again. And he just stood there, and everyone was completely silent. No one knew how to respond, and he said it was because in that moment, he discovered the power in accountability. Not only that, it gave him a power because he was able to better himself through that, and better himself through criticism and through admitting to something. And sometimes it takes me a while to come around, but usually, if I'm wrong, I feel like I do come to it.
You also showed a great talent for writing in one of your first hitchhiking signs. I think you had a hitchhiking sign that I still aspire. Many
It was
parts
really effective.
of this book I aspire to have written, but the hitchhiking sign is one
Yeah.
I particularly covet.
Well, we were, a couple of guys and I we were living in the Bay Area, and we were by the off-ramp, but near the Golden Gate Bridge, and we were trying to get a ride, and which you should never do if anyone here is young and wants to hitchhike.
Don't do
And
that. Yeah.
we had this cardboard sign that said, Marin, please, we've read Sartre. And it worked every single
Isn't that
time.
the best?
And yeah, worked every time. And but they would make me stand there by myself, usually in a mini skirt, and they'd be like, pull it up, and
I also, it is a book about gratitude, and I loved portraits of your son, of both your children, but of your son, his joie de vivre and his sense of how lucky. At some point he says, I mean, to me it's you and him when he says how lucky he is to be somewhere.
Yeah, he has an amazing capacity for, period. He's an amazing capacity for astonishment and for being able to revel in beauty and humor and be amazed. He's amazing capacity to be amazed, and he's big spirit, but he comes with a lot of big feelings, which are sometimes hard to navigate. And my daughter's, thank God, she's much more reasonable than either of us. And, I'm like, let's go on the trampoline naked. Everyone said, Mommy, it's much more reasonable right now for all of us to wear sweaters. And it's what? She's like, people can see us over the edge of the thing. I'm like, all right. But she has a sobering influence. And she's just as silly, too. She's just as fun. But it was another thing that was hard. One thing that was hard about the book was that there were letters that, that I wanted to write that I didn't. I thought, well, how can I have a book and not have a letter to my friend Hunter, or who I love with my whole heart? Or how can I not have a book, to my friend Kay Todd? And sometimes those letters didn't come, and they didn't come for particular reasons. I think 'cause some relationships, so much has been said to one another, and those relationships feel complete unto themselves, or there wasn't a moment that I felt I wanted to sort of draw out and point up to, but it was that was hard. I wanted everyone I loved in it,
I'm trying to sort of gauge how responsible this audience is. One of my favorite, there are many passages in the book. I mean, Mary-Louise was very ill this year, and I don't know if it's reasonable to ask you to read that section. I mean, to me, it's the most dramatic.
I'm freezing. I feel like I'm going to get pneumonia again. Is my coat back there? Does anyone have a
Let me get your
blanket?
jacket. Y'all talk
Get one of
amongst
those
yourselves.
airline blankets, those little thin blankets that's like so
Here, hand me her jacket.
I'm really sorry.
That, and this is my.
But you'll see why in a second. I can't get pneumonia again.
Here you go, little bunny.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
Do you want my scarf?
Oh, good. Let's just pick up this rug and just put it on.
No, look.
No, it's fine. Feel free to doze. This is long.
I think it's quite dramatic.
My sister. Okay. Dear Doctor, I came to you only partially conscious. Once I went into shock, you were already saving me with your vast knowledge that I will never grasp. I'm confident I wouldn't understand the most basic medical strategy if it were explained to me by Mr. Rogers. I went to sleep feeling poorly and woke at 2 a.m. with a pressure on my left side so intense that I put my hand over my mouth to muffle a cry. I searched the internet for agony on the left side of the body and read that you only needed to be alarmed when vomiting blood, and as if on cue, I coughed up something too salty to be saliva. I went to the sink, and what I expectorated was pale pink, which I thought qualified as only blood E. I tried going back to bed, but my mouth began filling with blood, and 3 more times in 20 minutes, the color of what came up deepened from pink lemonade to beets. The children's nanny answered her phone, but I don't remember much after that until she arrived. I was writhing while my son urged her to call 911, and my daughter curled up in a terrified ball at the end of my bed. The paramedics arrived, and when they came into the room, my kids stood up. My son put his arm around his sister. He tipped forward at the waist in my direction as though he were decorating the bow of a ship. He was craning toward me with all his might while she had crawled so far inside herself that her face would have seemed impassive if not for the set of her jaw. Her eyes patently demanded I not leave her. Don't you dare, I won't let you, they said, blinking fiercely. The imprint of them trying to look like their own ideas of dutiful children for my sake is the one I took with me. When I pictured it in my head, the image vibrated a little, like looking through a viewfinder. As you know, I almost wasn't here anymore. Do people feel grateful for almost dying? I felt oddly privileged, despite seeing everyone poised to go down another set of tracks while I was held forcibly behind. You don't get to clean off your desk. You don't get to say, I prefer April. It can always be tomorrow morning. The severing is complete and cauterizes all autonomy with it, which, yes, is obvious, but not fully grasped until you've heard the sound of machines and voices keeping you alive. And then imagine the absence of that sound, so unceremonious when it quits. When I woke up in the hospital where it nearly happened, I saw the room as it would have looked had I died in it. I laid there listening to the swill of oxygen tanks, the ensemble of alarms and beeps, and I imagined the whole orchestration abruptly stopping and everyone in the room filing out. I saw the overlit hallway where my friends would have stood while you explained what happened. I knew the face of at least one of the men who would have put my body in a bag and zipped it up, and I could picture that bag being taken through the back doors of the hospital. My friend Nikki was wearing her blue t-shirt with the arrow on it when she dropped everything and left her children to go to the airport. I have an image of her returning home in that same t-shirt. In my mind, every scene is dressed with the actual props and wardrobe, making it seem like I escaped something I was already in the midst of. The fantasy stops once I get to the point of my children being told that the last time they saw me was the last time they ever would. The image of them that morning when I was taken away by ambulance has to end with them in my bedroom. Seeing it play out with an unhappy ending distills a lifespan to no more than the inexorable velocity demanding of working organs. What is it like in the room when they shut down? Is it like the hitting of a light switch, which is just an interruption of current? After you turn the switch, photons remain clinging to the walls for a disputable length of time after our brain cells tell us that it's dark. And what if we hovered there like that? Part of us painted on the surfaces in an in-between state. This could be true if we are nothing more than the future beds for violets and moles. Where did I go when I went into shock and started speaking gibberish? I felt myself convulsing and came out of it long enough to see my children's nanny cover her mouth and cry. I strained to put my head up, saying, "Don't worry, please. I always shake like this when I'm afraid." I asked about this later, but everyone in the room said that I was not speaking English. Unintelligible sounds fell from my mouth. Metabolic anencephaly is the medical term for it. But you were not there, is the phrase I kept hearing. I felt a partially opened window somewhere that might pull me through, and this was not an abstract thought. I heard ugly words that I knew were bad news. They fell from the lips of your nurses with implicit underscoring: septic shock, hypoxemia, cyanosis. At one point, there were 9 people in my room, and everyone was moving so fast. I became somewhat conscious and was asked questions about proxy and who to call in case. I had to sign permission for a procedure that could potentially puncture a lung. I heard the head nurse shout out, "I'm doing this the old-fashioned way. Don't talk to me about fever reduction. Go get me fucking ice. I'm doing this myself." More faces filed through. One of your fellows said, "You will feel this," as he took a scalpel and sliced into my thigh to prepare for femoral cannulation. As he stitched me up, I whispered, "Am I going to be okay?" Speaking to himself more than me, he said, "We are doing the best we can. I promise." I got to watch people trying to save a life. I felt mine pulled away and back in spurts of protest and compliance. From a completely different vantage point, I got to measure a length of mortality against that infinite question mark. Best of all, there is a small but distinct category of negative thought that I abandoned somewhere when I realized I only had the strength to hold so much and something had to go. I can't decide where existence lies or barely dangles, and Doctor, maybe you don't know either, but I can tell you I am humbled by the second chance. I don't know what death is, but I am 100% clear on what it isn't. It isn't my daughter refusing to try on a pair of shoes while the salesman admonishes me for buying her the wrong insoles, and then leaving the store furious as my daughter says, "I want you to know I support you 100%. Can today be the day I start drinking coffee?" It also isn't the dog digging a pack of gum out of my purse and chewing it, then peeing on the gum wrappers and crawling in my lap, making me forget to hate her. It isn't having the door handle to my office break off in my hand when I realize my only keys are in there, and then remembering that, oh yeah, these are luxurious problems. It isn't having too much to do and wanting to scream, and it isn't screaming. It might be poetry, but it isn't sitting and hearing it read by my son. It isn't him giving a standing ovation for the actor with the smallest part, or my daughter confessing that she lied and then doing a cartwheel. It isn't Antiques Roadshow after sex for the 6th time and the sheets are threatening to disintegrate. It isn't me listening to my children breathe at night and that be enough to make my heart keep pumping blood. That one, mine, was not the only heart you saved. Sure, they may have used the loss of their mother to fuel them in life toward a greater purpose. Or maybe it would have been so damaging that they'd never fully come back. Thanks to you, I don't have to watch either of those scenarios play out while perched on a cloud fighting with God to let me intercede, or spend eternity aching to at least become the quivering sunbeam that lands on them one morning when they roll out of bed, age 25. It was too scary for me to face, my body giving me warnings of being so screamingly temporary. I wonder how often we are being nudged, but we turn away. We find a place to jettison all of it, or hand it to someone and say, "Here, please organize this for me. I can't stand it." It would be eerie if those warnings lingered somewhere. The sound of them. Run home. Don't answer the door. Walk away from him now. What if that lasted? If only I knew what last meant. There is no now, my father would say, banging his cane on the floor on the word now. As soon as you say the word, it's already in the past. When is it? There isn't one. This is the only moment, and it has already passed. The only things suspending time are children and cross-country travel. Not even all our stars are moving. That was light years ago. It's only us here, dying as slowly as we can.
Mary-Louise Parker. Really wonderful.
That was a mouthful.
Beautiful.
Sorry.
Beautiful. Really beautiful.
Thank you.
Really. I think maybe you guys have some questions.
What your favorite books have been this year?
Well, I'm a big poetry geek, so I love Mark Strand's collected poems, and I read that pretty much daily. I read poetry every day, and I highly recommend it. And I loved Mary Karr's book, The Art of the Memoir, which is less a
Good
book
for me.
about, for me, it is a book of if you want to write a memoir, but it's also a book about sort of mining your truths and you're going back through your stories and your indexes and discovering that there's always more than you thought there was, and maybe this iteration is not quite as truthful as that one, and it's just I found so much in that book that was useful for writing and just for life and just for being a more honest person.
She's on the payroll. She's on the payroll. Thank you.
Mary, what about you? What was your favorite book this past year?
I really did love this book, but I taught a memoir class. I'm actually teaching a memoir class that's open to humans, as opposed to the orangutans I normally teach. And Patmos, Greece this summer with Rodney Crowell. There's a website called Good World Journeys. So June 10th to 20th. That has nothing to do with the book, but I have to do my plug. So there I go. Or else it's going to be me and Rodney in a room in Patmos, which isn't that bad. So I read a bunch of memoirs that, Nabokov's Speak Memory, Hilary Mantel's Giving Up the Ghost, Black Boy, I think, started the memoir craze, Michael Hare's Dispatches, Maxine Hong Kingston's Woman Warrior, Mary McCarthy's Memories of Catholic Girlhood. So.
I liked H's for Hawk, too.
Oh, I liked H's for Hawk.
H's for Hawk is a great
It's
book.
great book. I'm doing an event with her next month, but if you read the book, she's kind of referencing, which is T.H. White's book, The Goshawk.
Yeah,
It is riveting.
yeah.
It is riveting. You see where she kind of got the power or the insane notion that she was going to become a, hawker
Yeah,
or whatever hell you call them.
yeah. Hawker.
Hawk human.
I can't be hawker. That can't be the word. There's got to be another term.
That's something you do that makes
Yeah.
that bad noise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, y'all. I couldn't stop myself. I tried to. I felt it coming out. I couldn't pull it back yet.
It's a question for Mary-Louise Parker. I read in some reviews your love of poetry. I love listening to poets and read their work, but I have the hardest time falling in love with poetry. When did you come to fall in love with poetry?
Oh.
Such a great question.
Poetry, see, I'm such a geek, but I get so excited. But I feel the thing with poetry is that people feel like they have to understand it. And I feel like people go to a poem and they feel like they want to understand it in the way that they understand fiction. And it's not the same. I think if you think of it almost like listening to music, and the way you don't always hear all the words, but you just let it wash over you. And sometimes it's the rhythm, and sometimes it's you know, the velocity with which the words come out. It can be any part of it, and you can go back and reread it. I mean, it's rare that I read it the first time and I get every single. See, you know, there's this Andrew Zawecki poem that I feel like I've been reading for years, and I still don't fully digest it, maybe, but I still love it, and it evokes different things in me every time. And you know, there's so many poets to love. You know, James Galvin, Evan Boland, Mark Strand, of course, Charles Simic, Philip Levine. This lady right here has written some.
On the
Devil's
payroll.
Tour is incredible. Shut it. No, she's seriously profound. And no.
Yusef
Yusef
Komunyakaa.
Yeah, there's so many. And well, I'm not going to name the ones that you don't like, because then that would be like.
We could mud wrestle up here. We could get it going on.
But I think it's just, there's also there's some that are easier to read than others, and there's some that, you know, I used to feel like I wanted to like James Merrill, and Mary today told me I didn't have to, and I don't mind saying that because he's dead, so it's like I don't care. But Black Swan I thought was the most beautiful poem, so I thought I had to understand the other poems, and I really don't. They're too academic for me. They're too hard.
It's a lot of those
it shouldn't
poems
be
are
that much work.
a lot of them are a trick on white people.
Yeah.
It's like all the white people in all the colleges got together and they're like, let's just make it hard for people to take English test and get into college. And they came up with like the most abstruse poetry that they could drum up, and that's what they've been tormenting. A lot of what passes is that unintelligible horse dookie is not that it's if you actually I remember there was a time once I was at a poetry reading and there were all these great critics, and Seamus Heaney was there, and James Merrill was there, and Sven Berkertz, Helen Vindler at Harvard College, and Robert Polito, and I was asking them, I don't get it. Merrill had just given this reading. I said, it's a terrible reading. It didn't make any sense.
But Black Swan is an amazing poem.
That's an amazing poem. But the interesting thing was when I said, so help me understand, y'all, help me understand what was great about this. And they were like, and they looked off in the distance. Well, you know, it's as if in La Ventura, and they start talking about something else.
Yeah.
And then you realize, oh, this is a trick. Y'all don't like this either.
But even like,
but y'all are gonna fake that you do, and I'm so upset about that.
but there that is easy. You know, Sharon Olds is easy to understand. Philip Larkin doesn't take an enormous amount of decoding. There are many poets that don't take an enormous amount
That
of
is
decoding.
correct.
And I feel like then there are others that the gift is sort of the ephemera of
Do
it.
you
and
memorize poetry?
Well, the Stanley Kunitz poem that, you know, reminds me of my dad, or the Phil Levine poem that, and I quoted your poem today on the airplane. You didn't even know what I was talking about. She was like, "What's that?" I was like, "You wrote
It's
that,
like, that's
bitch."
great. Who wrote that?
But I can't memorize it as well as you do. But I have other, you know, I'm pretty good at memorizing lines. But
That's amazing. You're excellent at that. You have other questions, though, Ted. We've gone
Yes.
down a
sorry.
rocky road.
There's a question here from a lady who says, email and texting and the always on with devices, I feel, has impacted us in our letter writing. In a story on your book in the Los Angeles Times, you're quoted as saying your father wrote amazing thank you letters. Can you please talk about those?
He wrote amazing letters, period, and my mother writes amazing letters. My sister writes amazing letters, and I feel like the letters are an incredible gift, and people are so happy to receive a letter. And my son wrote 2 thank you notes this week, and I was so proud of him because they were actual letters. He was proud of them, and he really thought about them, and they were funny and they were touching, and I said that's going to matter so much to those people. And but I love letters. I'm a romantic, and I love stationery and pens and envelopes, and I love getting letters. And I've done way too more than I should for just a letter. I feel like
We've got a whole book of them.
Yeah.
It's really a book of thank you letters.
It's a bunch of thank you notes to me. That's what it is.
But in a beautiful, kind of beautifully written.
But I think people appreciate being considered, and when you take the time to sort of, wrestle that onto the page for them, the way that you see them or how you feel about them, I think people really do appreciate that. And it's indelible in a far different way than the internet or the interweb or whatever the...
Interweb?
I don't know.
I like it.
I'm
I'll go
51
with it.
years old. I can call it whatever I want.
Call it whatever
so.
you want. We haven't talked about a project we're doing together.
Yeah, I'm going to play you and your mother, or hopefully one of you, one or both of you.
Right. So Mary-Louise is collaborating with myself and with producer Sarah Timberman, who's done Masters of Sex and Justified and Elementary, and is a big swinging dick, as I like to think of her. On a version of...
My mother did not even crack a smile when you said that. She did it.
Your mother and
I.
I'm so sorry.
No, I just love it. I just wanted to
Forgive me.
see. And
Forgive me.
She's just implacable.
But Mary-Louise is
I
going to be
heard that
involved
word.
in doing
I'm not taking
bringing
it.
the Liars Club and Lit to the small screen. So anyway.
Yeah. I should be so lucky, really.
We both should.
Here's a question. I think this is for Mary Karr. It says, did you grow up around people who used colorful metaphors in their speech, or is this something you learned? It seems those who grow up in the South or in Texas are much more gifted that way.
I think we are more gifted. My friend Unni is here tonight. It's like my best friend since I was 15. My daddy, when there was a big thunderstorm, would say, it's raining like a cow pissing on a flat rock. I mean, that's a line of poetry for all intents and purposes. It conjures a physical world that if you've ever been in such a world, it brings it right. It's carnal. It's right at the bounds of social propriety, and it crosses over into being improper. And and when you bust out laughing when you hear it, that makes you kind of implicit and transgressive in even doing that. And suddenly you're in a world where cows piss on flat rocks, and people stand around and marvel at it. And so, yes, I think all Southern culture is Gothic, and part of the key to that is metaphor, is colorful language and metaphor, I think, and the poetry of where I grew up. So, you might hate the Texans.
I didn't really grow up in the South, so I have lived in the South.
But you have a Southern streak.
I do, yeah. But I do, I guess I do.
You do?
Yeah. I'll take it.
Are there any letters that you decided not to include in the book?
Yeah, there was my friend Larissa, and she came to stay with me, and she was helping me because I had all these letters all over the floor, and she had them all over her dining room table in California, and then I had a bulletin board, which at one point, no one in the house took responsibility for it. My daughter said it was my son said it was me. There, at the bottom, all the letters that didn't make it in, and it was one I really wanted to write about Steve Smith. Yeah, Dear Mr. Blue Skies, which I wanted to write, and I didn't have enough time in the end, but, and then there was some Dear Newspaper Boy, Dear this, and then suddenly there was like Dear Shithead. And I was like, who put that there? And my daughter said, you did, Mommy. And I was like, I don't think I did. And Mom was like, no, you did. I think it was Ash. And then no one took responsibility. But, there were so many, but then at a certain point, everyone started becoming a letter to me. And I remember there's one night I called my literary agent. And I said, just don't be alarmed, but in a second, you're probably going to get a letter saying that sent to you that says, "Dear guys, I met at Benihana last night." Because I was like, everyone I met, I was like, I couldn't write the ones I really wanted to, like about my best friends, but it was everything. But some of them were recursive. They were notes that appeared already in the book. And Dear Doctor, there was one I wrote for a guy who walked around the hospital playing guitar to people, just out of the goodness of his heart. But that letter kind of repeated the notes in Dear Doctor, so some of them had to go, but it's hard to keep them back, because some of them I liked.
Now, having published the book, is there anyone in the process of writing it, publishing it, and touring for the book that you may have a letter for that you might consider for the paperback edition?
Can you do that? I guess you can, right?
It could say, "Dear Mary Karr, to whom I owe everything."
I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of off writing new stuff, and yeah, I'm sort of onto writing other things and poems and things like that. It would never be finished, really, though. There's so many men and so many beautiful moments that it could have been, infinite jest. It could have been so big, but I didn't have the time because I only was given 4.5 months to write it, and I was sick for some of that, so.
I first took notice of Ms. Parker in her heartbreaking performance in Boys on the Side. Subsequently, she has proved equally adept at comedic roles as well. But I was wondering, which roles do you prefer, comedies or dramas?
I sort of look on it all the same way, really. I kind of approach it like a human being, who are sometimes funny and sometimes sad, I guess. In terms of projects themselves, like, I think I prefer being on stage, first of all, but I like things that are very extreme. I like things that are very, very dark, very, very funny, I don't like, nice plays about people who go to the Hamptons and the sisters get in a fight and then the brother marries the girl, and I don't like that kind of shit. But
You just described every film released this year, I think.
really, well, if I'm going to do a play, I want to love it a little bit more because it takes so much out of me. But I do love extremes the most, I think, in either direction.
Okay, considering the success you've achieved as an actor and now an author, if you could wake up tomorrow with the same level of experience and accomplishment in a different profession, what might that be?
Please say hooker. I'm so sorry.
I mean, I have a lot of respect for people who take care of the elderly, like pediatric nurses, people who do those kind of jobs. Those are the people that I really, really admire. And people, that you overlook, like people who deliver your groceries, I feel like those are the people who, that's the only job they could get probably at the time, and they are the one who could be out, keying your car or slicing your tire or whatever. But the people who are taking the jobs, because I've taken those jobs, I've been that person, and a lot of us have, and I don't really I don't think about what I don't have in those terms. I think about how I beat myself up a lot about what if I feel like I haven't done something well enough, and it's something I'm working on, and it's something I'll probably work on until I die. But in terms of what I can't do or don't have in those terms, I'm just thankful that I can do anything, honestly. I really am. I am.
You have really high standards for yourself, high standards of performance.
Why not? I mean, something can always be better. You can always improve something. No? You don't think so?
Oh.
She's like, it's fine, whatever.
No, I write things 60 times, so yeah, no, I agree.
right? I feel the same way.
Question for Mary Karr. A lady says, I have a fascination with the concept of whether writing can be taught or is it an innate gift. As a creative writing teacher, where do you stand on that?
I mean, I turned down a job at Columbia because I think it's the worst creative writing program in the history of Western civilization.
I love that you just say that.
And,
I love it. She'll just say whatever she wants to say. It's so amazing.
But
I mean, I say I don't like ketchup, and it's in the post. It's like suddenly, like the tomato farmers, everyone wants me to die. You just say whatever you want. It's amazing.
tomato farmers.
No,
want you
it's
to
just
die.
incredible.
So funny to me. No, but I mean, I think it.
She's so cheerful about it too.
No, but I mean, I think there are a lot of places that do it badly that have a big name and take a lot of people's money. The program I teach in at Syracuse, we often
That's
have
great.
1,000 applications for 12 positions, and everybody comes with money. Everybody comes funded. Nobody goes into debt. And it's something I feel very strongly about as a professor, and that the university has permitted us to make happen there. And I wouldn't do it if I thought, in fact,
That's amazing.
I think the best thing I do is teaching. It's what I'm really good at is I'm a good fan. I'm a great fan of great writing. And being a teacher, you get to watch people fall in love with things you're in love with. It's like, what could be more fun?
And our final question
That's
for the
awesome.
evening,
That's
and
great.
this would be for both of you. If there were a book club, but fashioned where people brought their favorite letters to read, who would you like to be sitting around that table?
Favorite letters?
Wait, do the people who...
This
I
is-
have such a hard time with hypotheticals.
I'm having a hard
Okay,
time with...
So, who's at the table? The people who wrote the letters or the people... Do you
We're
get
not
it?
smart enough to understand that.
I think that the
help
question
help
is-
me, Tim.
Ask Lisa. Lisa will
For all the
understand
people
it.
who did not
She
write
doesn't
a
get it
book
either.
with a collection of letters, who would you like
No,
to
it's a
invite
great question. I just
to
don't
read
understand it.
their letters around a table?
Oh, Jesus would be good, right?
Jesus has gotten a lot of mail.
Yeah. He gets a lot of airplay, Jesus, and yeah, I would say Jesus.
That's a great idea. Who would you like to read their? it's such a-
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something. Flannery O'Connor's letters, The Habit of Being, is one of the great collection of letters, and Chekhov's letters, Keats's letters of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. But Jesus, I go with the MLP on the Jesus thing. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for having us.